Okay, we're back now. I got this all tied up. So like I say, what I did was I stuffed the one sleeve inside the other one and I scrunched up the edges and then I just tied it up with kite string. So now we're getting ready to dye this, and we're going to start with the mandala here. So, and I'm going to dye it in rainbow colors just so that we can really get a clear thing of what's going on here. So let's zoom in a little bit. So remember, this here is a hoodie that's been soaked in soda ash, spun out, and then hung to dry. So what I'm going to do, if I can get this positioned here so that you can see what's going on. To start with, if I'm working on dry fabric, I'm going to usually spritz it with a little bit of soda ash. I keep some in a bottle, spray bottle, just so that I can do this. That just helps the dye not, sometimes you'll put the dye on, it just wants to roll right off. When you spritz a little bit, if it's slightly damp, then the dyes will more readily soak in. So I usually will give it just a quick little spray just to make everything just a little bit damp. So not, you don't want it like soft and wet, but just damp, and it just allows the dye to soak in better. Okay, so let's wipe up the excess here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with purple down here at the tip. Put that on. Yeah, I can see it still wants to sit there a little bit, so sometimes if you'll kind of squeeze it around with the tip of the bottle here, it'll start soaking in. Okay, let's give that a little squeeze here. And you really should be wearing gloves. I know I'm setting a bad example, I apologize. But there you have it. Okay, so the purple one should be fairly good. I don't think I'll have to really come back to it much at all. But once we start getting up onto some of these other ones where there's more fabric in there, then we'll need to, I'll usually squeeze them a little bit. I guess I need to spray this just a little bit more. But I'll probably have to squeeze them a little bit to get the dye to soak in, but also I'll probably have to come back a few times and apply more dye until it really feels like it's nice and wet inside there. And I'll kind of show you guys a trick of how I try to determine whether a section needs more dye or not. Sometimes just pushing on a little bit will help that dye soak in. And I have a cuticle tool here. It's got a nice smooth metal edge here that I can work with, and it's cheap. It was a couple bucks in the makeup department. Flip that over. I guess I didn't flip it and do the turquoise yet. Yeah, and this really does come in handy. This is the way that I kind of determine if a section has enough dye in it, is by pushing, and it should look kind of damp when you push down in there. Right now it looks damp just because I'm pushing the fabric inside, but later on I'll do a test on all of these and I'll zoom in even closer. Okay, let's get this one. But to start with, I like to get dye put on each section so that it can start soaking in. That's the thing about a hoodie. Once we get up to the main body here, there's going to be a lot of time involved with letting the dye soak in. So I'll start out by getting the mandala part, having some dye on it, and then I'll move into dyeing the rest of the hoodie, and then I'll come back to this and check to see if it needs more dye. Any part of the hoodie, you definitely want a nice saturation. It's going to be within your mandala design. So that's what we're going to try to achieve here. That's why I folded it in to get the 6 points rather than 8 points, because that just gives us 4 less layers of fabric that we have to try to dye inside each one of these little nodules here. So pushing on these things is going to help the dye soak in, because I'm putting the fabric, all the layers together in there, and then when I lift up, then some of those fabric, the layers will pull some of that dye that is sitting there under pressure. It'll pull that deeper inside just through the releasing. So we'll get that next section going here. And you can go in any order with the rainbow. I happen to want to end with fuchsia up here because I think I'm going to do the main part of the hoodie in light green and dark green. So I wanted to have a brighter color, so I figured I'll have the fuchsia next to the green, so that the mandala will really pop out nicely, having that contrasting color there. Okay, oh, I think I'm off my mark here. Okay, I guess you can see now. So yeah, it takes a while. You just have to be patient with the hoodies, let the dye soak in. And see, that's the other thing about these big sections, is you can pull them open, because we folded back and forth with the folds there. That means these folds now are able to open up. Sometimes if you just fold it up and then fold it in half, then you got one big thick fold and you can't open it up much. Like I say, I'll come back to these, probably at least from the green up, and give them a check later. But as I work on the rest of the hoodie, that'll give that dye time to move around, saturate how it's going to within the mandala there. Okay. Let's see, let's do something on the back here. So if I'm going to do this in greens, I think I'll do a blue here on the back. And what I'm going to do is just put the turquoise dye, not the blue, the turquoise, right along my ties where I tied the sinew at, and let it kind of seep in there, and that just kind of creates kind of an electric looking effect there. It is not gonna, it's still gonna have a white line, but it's gonna have the turquoise on either side of it. And then when I coat the rest of it with the green, the darker green, then those blue lines are gonna stand out a little bit. And just because if I saturate it really good, the green dye won't be able to get down inside these cracks. So That's the way to kind of create the electric look there, by tying tight with the sinew and then dyeing right over top of the sinew and just letting that dye soak down inside. And as I work on the rest of the hoodie here, I'll come back to this a few times and put more dye down inside those cracks, just to try to really saturate that and make sure that my green can't get inside there. So that's what I'm going to start with next. I have a bright green, and then I have my emerald green. So I'm going to first coat this hoodie with the light green, and then I'm going to go over top of it with the darker green. We'll get this turquoise wiped up first. Okay. So, and I know where my sleeves are, that I have one sleeve all wrapped up on this one side, so I just need to make sure I get down inside all of these cracks here, and I know that I'm going to have good coverage on this sleeve, and then the same thing on the other one. So, and this here could use just a little bit more of a spray of soda ash. I can see that dye not wanting to quite soak in yet. There we go. So usually when I'm doing my first coat, I do get a lot up on the top, but what I like to do is try to get down inside these cracks here with my first color, my lighter color. And then when I'm putting the darker color on top, that's when I want to make sure that I get all the white spots that I see. But if I've already hidden some light colors down inside these cracks here, then the darker colors going over top, they're not going to get all the way in there. So that just gives me some nice contrast in my design here by layering the colors. So, and if you were careful in the folding of your hoodie, then each side of the hoodie that I worked with, I tried to make sure that I have creases here, that I can open them up, look down inside, and get dye in there. Sometimes you fold one of these things up in such a fashion that you have spots that you can't get to because of the way they're folded up. And then sometimes you end up with big white spots just because you couldn't check that spot and you couldn't get dye to that spot. So I try to always make sure that I can get to all the spots, and if I can't, then I try to make sure I saturate over top of it so that hopefully the dye will soak all the way down inside. Now as I'm working on this sleeve, I'm not really seeing any dye from the other side, so that's the other thing in this instance. If you have the sleeves folded that way, you could dye one sleeve one color and the other sleeve a different color, having them stacked up like this. And you might get a little bit of contamination between the two sleeves, but pretty much you're going to have them separated. And if you really want to make sure they're separated, you could put a piece of plastic in between there, right between the two sleeves, and then you wouldn't, if you had any dye come, it might spread the other directions, but you wouldn't have it on the sleeves. So there's lots of different ways you can play with your tie-dye here and get different effects or dye things up in a funky fashion. Yeah, you just got to spend a lot of time with hoodies and make sure you open up all of the various cracks and creases in here and look for dye. Or mostly you're looking for the lack of dye. And you don't have to be quite as perfect with the first round, because I know I'm going to go back over this with a darker green. But before I do that, I'm going to hit these creases up again. Just try to get a little bit more dye down inside there. And this one now I'm just going to go for saturation. Any of the white spots I see, I'm going to try to cover those up. I'll still do some opening of the cracks to make sure that whatever I didn't hit with the first round, I get with this one. But this is going to take a while, so I'm just going to fast forward this and get this the rest of the way dyed. I'll slow it back down when I go to check my Mandala, so I'll be back in a few. Okay, I got the hoodie all dyed, and now I'm coming back to my mandala here that I have in the center. And the way that I like to test these is to push on, let's see if we can get even closer here. Yeah, maybe not. Okay. Anyways, when I push on these sections, like I say, I'm just using a cuticle pusher here. But any type of a tool, you know, a chopstick or the end of a spoon, something metal where you can push down in there. And basically what you want to see is a little bit of liquid kind of pool up when you push on it. If when you push on it, it looks dry, or, I mean, if you get the slight look of liquid coming up, I still would add a little bit more. I like to have it look a little bit swampy when I push on it. Sorry I didn't fill my bottle here beforehand, but I need more fuchsia dye. So that's how I check, is by pushing on it. And like I say, that also is what helps it soak into the middle, is if you push on it while you're putting the dye on. But you can see now as I push on this, although I like to wait a few minutes to push on it. So like this orange one, as I'm pushing on it, I can see a little bit pool up, but then as soon as I release, it quickly soaks down in there, and then the next time I push, there's not as much. So that's another indication. So we'll just keep adding a little bit more dye to these, and then keep coming back and checking them. And usually it's just the bigger sections, just because there's more fabric there. So we'll put some on the yellow one too. And I think the green one probably, yeah, it looks pretty dry also. So I guess we can zoom back out just a bit. Add that in there. And the turquoise and the purple probably don't need much at all, but I'll add just a little bit so that they have a little bit of a sheen to them when you look at them. So let's go back and we'll test this orange one again. Yeah, see, it still wants to just soak right in. So we'll just keep adding more, and then I'll flip it over and I'll do the same thing. Just assume that the fuchsia needs it also. Yeah. So yeah, the hoodies, they just take a lot of extra work, but when you get one done and you get it nice and saturated, it's well worth the time you put into it. Okay, I think the green one is probably good. Yeah, it doesn't take much at all. when I push on that. Let's see if I can zoom in on that just a little bit. Wrong way. Okay, let's see if we can see that. Yeah, so you can see, I know it's out of focus, but you can see the shininess right around this. That means we probably have enough in the green one there. So that's what you want. I'll add just a little bit more, and then we'll get some of these others. And that's what it takes, is just coming back, adding a little bit of dye, because you can't put too much on at one time or it's just going to roll off. So you have to put just enough on to get it wet, and it'll soak in. And like I say, to speed that process, if you go along with your little metal tool, you can push on that and it'll start soaking in, and all it can do is soak into the middle. If it soaks in and goes away, that's because the fabric in the middle is taking it. Yeah, that's looking much better now. I'm going to flip this over. We'll take a peek at the other side. Although, yeah, the other side, I didn't lift the centerpiece up when I was moving it around the table, so it soaked up a nice big green spot of dye. So that kind of sucks, but sometimes you can get a little bit of that out. That's another thing this tool is good for, although it does spread the spot out, so I'm going to have a bigger, lighter spot rather than a smaller, darker spot. I don't know which is better. You guys can decide for yourselves. But by scraping a little bit, I have taken a little bit of that green dye out of there. Yeah, I guess I'm a bit of a sloppy dyer. I think we fairly well got this swamped up the way we like it. Yeah. Yep, each of those sections now, I'll put a little bit on these other two now that I flipped it over, or three. But I think I got all of my sections done pretty good. I'm going to come back and I'll check it one more time in about 10 minutes, and if it still looks like this, then we'll call it good. If not, then I'll add more dye. But basically at this point, I'm done with this hoodie. I'm going to let it sit up for at least 24 hours, possibly 48, depending on what my wash schedule and the rest of my tie-dye looks like. Thank you for watching. Please like and share my videos, because that shows me that you guys are interested in more. If you want more, give me a thumbs up. Have a great day, and we'll see you later.